December 1987, as families gathered to celebrate peace and joy in the small town of Dover, Arkansas, a sinister shadow disrupted the season's cheer. For one family, the holidays turned into a nightmare of unimaginable horror. This is the chilling story of Ronald Gene Simmons, the so-called Christmas killer, who transformed a season of love into one of tragedy. What drives a person to destroy what they once held dear? What darkness within the human psyche turns a father into a predator? From a decorated war hero to the perpetrator of one of the deadliest family massacres in American history, Simmons' story reveals a mind consumed by secrets and rage, where the line between protector and predator blurred fatally. To understand the depths of this tragedy, we must trace Ronald Gene Simmons' life back to its beginnings, long before violence defined his legacy. Born on July 15, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois, Ronald Gene Simmons' early life seemed unremarkable. His father passed away from a stroke when Simmons was just 3 years old. Less than a year later, his mother remarried a civil engineer with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, prompting the family to move to Arkansas. Little is known about Simmons' early years, but his life took a disciplined turn when he dropped out of school and joined the United States Navy in 1957, later transferring to the U.S. Air Force. Simmons served his country with distinction during a 22-year military career, earning multiple honors, including the Bronze Star Medal, the Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship. Yet, beneath this seemingly honorable exterior lay the seeds of a far darker future. But behind the facade of a decorated military man, there were undercurrents of turmoil. Simmons married Rebecca Ulibarri in 1960 in New Mexico, and together, they had 7 children. However, the veneer of a normal family life was shattered in 1981 when allegations emerged that Simmons had been assaulting his 15-year-old daughter, Sheila, and had fathered a child with her. Fearing prosecution, Simmons uprooted his family, moving them from New Mexico to a desolate 13-acre tract of land in Pope County, 6.5 miles north of Dover, Arkansas, known as Mockingbird Hill. This property, isolated and ringed with a makeshift fence up to 10 feet tall, became a fortress of sorts, a place where Simmons could exert total control. The residents didn't have a phone or indoor plumbing. But what was it that drove a man of discipline and service to the edge of such darkness? Was it the fear of losing control over his family? The desperation to conceal his illicit acts? Or something deeper, a more sinister aspect of his psyche yet to be revealed? The facade of the family man began to crumble, revealing a tyrannical figure ruling his household with an iron fist. The family, once a symbol of joy and unity, became prisoners in their own home. This descent into tyranny was but a prelude to the horror that would unfold, unraveling the chilling transformation of Ronald Gene Simmons from a respected military man to one of the most notorious mass murderers in American history. In November 1979, Simmons retired from the Air Force and military service. He did some low-paying jobs in the nearby town of Russellville, Arkansas. He worked as an accounts receivable clerk at Woodline Motor Freight, but had to resign after multiple reports of inappropriate sexual advances. He worked for about a year and a half at a Sinclair Mini-Mart, but had to quit on December 18, 1987 because of low wages. 2 of the elder children, Billy and Sheila, had moved out, got married, and started their own families. So by the time of the murders, there were only 7 people living in the house. The calm of the holiday season in 1987 was shattered in Dover, Arkansas by a series of heinous crimes. Ronald Gene Simmons' descent into murderous madness began shortly before Christmas on December 22nd. The Simmons family home, once a haven of domestic life, turned into a chilling stage for an unthinkable act. Ronald Gene Simmons, armed with a .22 caliber pistol, commenced a killing spree that would become the worst family massacre in American history. His first victims were his wife, 46-year-old Rebecca, and eldest son, 26-year-old Ronald Jr., bludgeoned with a crowbar and shot. And he strangled Ronald Jr.'s daughter and his granddaughter, 3-year-old Barbara. Their demise was just the beginning. Simmons lay in wait for his other children, feigning a festive spirit, only to mercilessly end their lives, one by one. Later that day, the Dover school bus dropped off the younger kids for their Christmas break from school. In a macabre ritual, Simmons systematically strangled and drowned his younger children, displaying a level of brutality that defies comprehension. The youngest victims, mere toddlers, met a similar fate, their innocence stolen in the most atrocious way. Simmons told them he had gifts for each of them, which he wanted to give one at a time, then strangled them and held under the water in a rain barrel. First to receive her gift was his eldest daughter, 17-year-old Loretta. His 3 other children, 14-year-old Eddie, 11-year-old Mary, and 8-year-old Becky, were murdered in the same brutal manner. He then dumped the bodies in one of the cesspits he had made his children dig days before. But the horror did not end there. On December 26th, as the rest of the world celebrated, Simmons' remaining family members arrived for a holiday dated, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. 23-year-old Simmons' son Billy, his 21-year-old daughter-in-law Renata, and their child were the next to fall victim to his unfathomable rage. Billy and Renata were both shot dead. Their bodies were left by the dining room table next to the decorated Christmas tree with unopened gifts and covered with their own coats and some bedding. Then their 20-month-old son, Trey, was strangled and drowned. The same fate befell his 24-year-old daughter, Sheila, her 33-year-old husband, Dennis, and their children. Simmons strangled his and Sheila's child, 6-year-old Sylvia, and finally, his 21-month-old grandson, Michael. The bodies were meticulously laid out, a grim tableau that defied any sense of humanity. He then covered their bodies with coats. Sheila's body was laid on the dining room table and covered with Rebecca Simmons' best tablecloth. He wrapped the bodies of Trey and Michael in plastic sheeting, and they were left in abandoned cars behind the Simmons home. Simmons then embarked on a chillingly ordinary series of errands, his actions a stark contrast to the carnage he had just inflicted. He drove to a Sears store in Russellville to pick up Christmas gifts previously ordered for his family. That night, he went out for a drink at a local bar. When he returned home, he spent the night and the next day drinking beer and watching television surrounded by the dead bodies of his family. On December 28th, the killing spree spilled over into the town of Russellville. In the morning, Simmons drove a car that had belonged to his son, Ronald Jr., to a Walmart in Russellville and purchased a second firearm. Fueled by a mix of revenge and rage, Simmons targeted those he felt had wronged him. The violence was indiscriminate, claiming the lives of acquaintances and strangers alike. His former workplace, a law firm, became the stage for his continued rampage. 24-year-old Kathy Kendrick, a secretary who had rebuffed his advances, was his first victim. She was fatally shot. The brutality continued at the Taylor Oil Company, where he shot and wounded the 38-year-old owner, Russell Taylor, who was also the owner of Sinclair Mini Mart, from which Simmons had recently resigned. He also killed a complete stranger in the building and shot at another employee before exiting the building, but missed. In Sinclair Mini Mart, Simmons shot and wounded 2 more people. He then shot his former supervisor, 35-year-old Joyce Butts, twice and wounded her in the office of Woodline Motor Freight. She survived and testified later that Simmons had yelled at her during a previous argument about wages. The entire rampage lasted 45 minutes. 2 people were killed and 4 wounded. Simmons' final act was as perplexing as it was chilly. He said to the secretary in Woodline Motor Freight, "I just wanted to kill Joyce. Just Joyce. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." Simmons surrendered to police without resistance, his spree of violence concluding as abruptly as it had begun. But the most heinous of his crimes were yet to be discovered. Simmons sat silently in his cell and stared at the wall. He refused to speak to investigators or even his attorneys. He didn't say a word during the interrogation. But when he was asked about his family, Simmons' eyes got red and started to well up. His lips started to quiver. The police got suspicious. They couldn't reach his family, so 2 officers drove to the isolated home. The investigation began on the chilling grounds of the Simmons family home. Here, detectives encountered a scene that defied belief. Family members' bodies laid out with a chilling meticulousness. It was a tableau that spoke volumes about the mindset of the killer. In the aftermath of this unprecedented massacre, questions swirled. What drove a father, a husband, a war veteran to commit such unspeakable acts against his own family and community? And what can we learn from this tragedy to prevent such horrors in the future? In the wake of the horrific murders committed by Ronald Gene Simmons, law enforcement faced the daunting task of piecing together a puzzle that spanned both family tragedy and public rampage. As the probe widened to include Simmons' subsequent attacks in Russellville, the challenge for investigators was to understand the connection between the family murders and the seemingly random acts of violence that followed. The evidence gathered was overwhelming. Firearms, witness testimonies, and Simmons' own actions painted a picture of a man who, after committing an unspeakable act against his own family, sought to extend his vengeance to those he perceived had wronged him in the wider community. In a case that stunned even seasoned investigators, the question wasn't just who had committed these crimes, but why. What drives a man to annihilate his family and lash out at the world around him? The arrest of Ronald Gene Simmons brought an end to the immediate threat, but it was just the beginning of a quest for justice and understanding. The prosecution's task was to unravel the mind of Simmons, to present a narrative that could make sense of the senseless. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details emerged. Allegations of abuse, control, and a life led under the tyranny of Simmons became the focus. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the dark portrait of a man who had lived a life of deception and brutality. In the courtroom, the full extent of his crimes would come to light, bringing some answers, but also leaving haunting questions about the nature of evil. What kind of man lurked behind the annihilation of his family and terrorizing a community? Simeon's life was marked by strict discipline and control, traits honed during his military career. But beneath the surface of this structured exterior lay a tumultuous inner world. Allegations of sexual assault within his family suggest deep-seated pathological behavior. Experts in criminal psychology often point to a history of abuse, either experienced or perpetrated, as a significant factor in the development of violent behavior. In Simmons' case, the blurring of boundaries within his own family coupled with a need for dominance may have contributed to his downward spiral. The isolation of the Simmons family at Mockingbird Hill paints a picture of a man intent on exerting absolute control. This isolation could have exacerbated existing mental health issues, creating a pressure cooker environment. What then triggered Simmons to turn to murder? The possibility of his wife seeking a divorce might have been the tipping point, challenging his authoritarian hold over his family. She had already tried to leave him on numerous occasions, but always returned. A family friend informed the police that Simmons' wife had been saving up money to divorce him when the murder happened. Simmons' wife had written to their son shortly before the killings, "I don't want to live the rest of my life with Dad. I am a prisoner here and the kids too. Every time I think of freedom, I want out as soon as possible." Simmons' actions in Russellville suggest a broader rage directed not just at his family, but at anyone he perceived as a threat or who had rejected him. His targeting of individuals in the community indicates a blend of personal vendetta and displaced aggression. Yet the absence of any recorded mental illness diagnosis leaves us with more questions than answers. The depths of Simmons' mind remain, in many ways, a locked enigma. Could this tragedy have been averted? In exploring these questions, we confront the unsettling reality of how little we sometimes know about those closest to us. After the chilling massacre by Ronald Gene Simmons, the wheels of justice began to turn, bringing us to a courtroom where the grim details of his crimes would be laid bare. After a psychiatric evaluation, it was determined that he was sane and capable to stand trial. Simmons' trial was a focal point of national attention, a legal battle to seek justice for the unprecedented atrocity he had committed. The proceedings were swift, reflecting the urgency of a community seeking closure. In May 1988, Simmons stood trial for the murders outside his family, specifically the killings of Kathy Kendrick and Jim Chaffin. The evidence presented was overwhelming, leaving little doubt about Simmons' guilt. Simmons, who had acted with such brutality, now faced the consequences of his actions in a court of law. His demeanor in court was reported as defiant, a stark contrast to the calculated coldness of his crimes. On May 12, 1988, the verdict was delivered. Ronald Gene Simmons was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years. Remarkably, Simmons himself requested that no appeal be made on his behalf, saying, "To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment." Because of this, he had to be separated from other prisoners on death row. His life was in danger as they believed Simmons' refusal to appeal his death sentence was jeopardizing their prospects of escaping their own executions. The second trial for the murders of his 14 family members began in February 1989. Here, the prosecution delved into the harrowing details of the family massacre, painting a picture of a man driven by control and rage. During the trial, a shocking moment unfolded. Simmons lashed out in court, punching the prosecutor and attempting to seize a deputy's gun, an act that only outed to his infamy. This happened after Simmons' letter to his daughter, Sheila, was introduced, in which Simmons said, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell." After she had disclosed that he was her child's father to the police, on February 10, 1989, Simmons was found guilty of 14 counts of capital murder. The judge, undeterred by Simmons' outburst, handed down another death sentence. This rapid succession from trial to sentence was unprecedented, reflecting the severity of the crimes. The execution warrant for Simmons was signed by Arkansas Governor and later President Bill Clinton on May 31, 1990. All visitors, including legal counsel and clergy, were refused by Simmons. On June 25th, he died via the fatal injection method he had chosen in the Cummins unit. This was the shortest period from sentence to execution to death in U.S. history since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. His last words were, "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide." Nobody claimed his body, and he was buried in a common grave in Lincoln County, Arkansas. As we reflect on the legal proceedings against Ronald Gene Simmons, we are left to ponder the balance between justice and understanding. The case of Ronald Gene Simmons is a stark reminder of the potential for hidden dangers within our own homes, and it's crucial to recognize early warning signs. FBI profilers and psychologists suggest vigilance for certain behaviors, patterns of control, isolation, and abuse within a family. These can often be precursors to more violent actions. In cases like Simmons, where the perpetrator isolates the family, the intervention of external agencies becomes critical. Neighbors, friends, and relatives need to be attentive and proactive in reporting any suspicions. But perhaps the most profound lesson lies in understanding the human psyche. Simmons' case demonstrates the complex interplay of psychological factors that can lead to such extreme behavior. What led Ronald Gene Simmons to commit such heinous acts? The answer lies in a complex web of control, abuse, and psychological instability. His desire for dominance coupled with deep-seated issues, Simmons' military discipline juxtaposed with his chaotic personal life created a volatile mix. The isolation and control he exerted over his family only fueled his capacity for violence. And when his authority was threatened possibly by a looming divorce, it may have been the catalyst for the massacre. John Harris, one of Simmons' defense attorneys, said of his abused family, "I think he felt like they were going to take him out. He's going to take them out first." I think that was his mindset. Could anything have been done to prevent the carnage? In hindsight, the warning signs were there. Isolation, abuse, and a man teetering on the edge. Timely intervention could perhaps have altered this tragic course. Simon's story is a grim reminder that behind closed doors, within seemingly normal families, the seeds of tragedy can grow unnoticed. People feared him even back then in New Mexico. They said he was strange, unfriendly, antisocial. He didn't have much to say. A friend of his daughter's said, he had a beer in his hand all the time. He had one little room he would stay in all the time. It was dark and seemed spooky, and it stunk. Attorney John Harris also said that there was more than one person to blame. If authorities had successfully arrested him back in Mancom 81 on the basis of his daughter's sexual assault, the murders likely wouldn't have happened. However, prosecutors at the time said they had dropped the charges at the family's request. Ronald Gene Simmons' Christmas week killing spree is the worst mass murder committed by a single person in Arkansas history. What were the underlying reasons that made Simmons annihilate his whole family that once formed the core of his identity? Our next case takes us to Galt, a city situated in Sacramento County, California. Galt offers its residents a quiet suburban setting, and it is worth mentioning that the majority of the people living in this community are homeowners. It is in Galt that the story of Lucille Hochran unfolds. Not much is known about Lucille's early life, but it is documented that she and her husband, Frank Hochran, moved to Galt from Idaho in 1968. They were proud parents to two children, Frank and Henry. By the late 1970s, their sons had grown up and moved away, but Lucille and Frank chose to remain in the neighborhood. They were known for their kindness and affection, treating the children in the area as if they were their own grandchildren. Sean Jacobs, a former neighbor of the Holcrans, shared that they were open-hearted and welcoming. He fondly remembered being invited into their home during the summer, where they generously offered cookies and lemonade. Sean emphasized that he had never heard a single unkind word from Luju. According to others who knew Luju, she led a simple and humble life. She held a strong devotion to her family and her place of worship, Galt's First Methodist Church. Neighbors affectionately described her as a typical grandmother figure, often spending long hours tending to her garden. However, a significant change occurred in November 1985 when Lucille's husband, Frank, was admitted to a nursing home. As a result, Lucille found herself living alone in the company of her cats. Tragically, almost 2 years later, in October 1987, Frank passed away, succumbing to Alzheimer's disease. This loss deeply affected their entire family. In the midst of these challenging times, Lucille continued to navigate her life on her own. Yet, fate had another tragedy in store. On Friday, May 20th, 1988, Lucille celebrated her 79th birthday, unaware that it would be her last. On the following Sunday, May 22nd, the absence of Lucille from church caused concern among her fellow church members, as she was known to be a regular attendee. The day after, on May 23rd, of Lucille's friends decided to visit her and check on her well-being. They entered her home through a partially open sliding glass door and were shocked to discover Lucille's lifeless body in her bedroom. It was a tragic sight as the elderly lady had fallen victim to a brutal crime, having been stabbed, assaulted, and strangled to death. The state of her body indicated that some time had passed since her demise, adding to the distressing nature of the situation. Deeply alarmed by what they had found, the friends immediately rushed to the Gulf Police Department to report the horrifying scene. The police promptly responded and initiated an investigation into this tragic incident. Upon arrival, the responding officers noticed visible injuries on Lucille's chest. Interestingly, nothing seemed to be missing from her small one-bedroom home, leading investigators to rule out robbery as a motive. Determining the exact time of Lucille's death posed an initial challenge for the detectives. Initially, they believed she had been deceased for up to a week, considering the extent of decomposition. However, friends clarified that they had seen or spoken to Lucille just 3 days before her body was discovered. Subsequent autopsy reports revealed that Lucille had died from 2 fatal stab wounds to her chest. This heinous crime left Lucille's neighbors deeply alarmed, prompting them to take measures to enhance their security, such as locking doors and windows at night and implementing additional safety precautions to protect their families. Throughout the investigation conducted by the Gulf Police, several witnesses, including neighbors, family members, and church acquaintances, were identified and interviewed. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Office crime scene investigators provided valuable assistance by gathering a substantial amount of evidence from the scene. Despite extensive efforts and collaboration, the police were unable to definitively identify a suspect, even though fingerprints were collected by agents from the California Department of Justice and nail scrapings were successfully preserved from Lucille's body for potential future testing. As time passed, the leads grew colder and the case remained unsolved, leaving the community grappling with uncertainty and many unanswered questions. However, after over 30 years, technology finally caught up, and in January 2022, the county crime lab revisited the DNA evidence that had been stored for decades. Surprisingly, it was the fingernail scrapings that proved to be the key in cracking the case. Detectives entered the DNA profile derived from the genetic material found in the scrapings into the database, leading to a significant breakthrough. The profile matched an individual named Terry Leroy Bramble, who was revealed to have been a longtime resident and transient in Gulf. Terry had a history of criminal convictions and had spent years living on the city streets, often beneath the Highway 99 overpass. Unfortunately, Terry passed away in 2011 at the age of 55 due to natural causes. Interestingly, during the initial investigation into Lucille's death in 1988, Terry had not surfaced as a suspect, according to police records. With both the suspect and Terry now deceased, investigators were left without the means to uncover the motive behind the crime or how Terry and Lucille may have crossed paths prior to her untimely death. Despite the lack of accountability for Lucille's murderer, officials from the Gulf Police expressed their satisfaction in finally being able to close the case. Although the questions surrounding the motive and circumstances remained unanswered, there was a sense of closure and resolution after more than 30 years of uncertainty. During a news conference, Sacramento County District Attorney and Marie Stubbart conveyed a statement on behalf of Lucille's surviving son, Henry Hochran, who expressed his sentiments. He disclosed his relief that the case had ultimately been resolved, but also expressed his desire for the responsible individual to still be alive to face the consequences of their actions. Henry emphasized that while this development provided some answers, it could never truly bring closure, due to the lasting impact of the tragedy on their lives. On November 10, 2015, the life of 30-year-old Pastor Davy Blackburn was forever altered when he returned home from the gym to his residence on Sunnyfield Court in Indianapolis, Indiana, only to be confronted with his worst nightmare. Inside the house, his 28-year-old wife, Amanda Blackburn, who was 12 weeks pregnant, lay on the living room floor, partially nude, grievously injured and covered in blood. Rushing upstairs, he discovered their 15-month-old son Weston unharmed in his crib. Davy immediately dialed 911 as Amanda, though still alive, was in critical condition. Tragically, neither Amanda nor her unborn child would survive this horrific ordeal. The following day, On November 11, 2015, Amanda was removed from life support and passed away. Who could have perpetrated such a heinous act against a pregnant woman? Was it a random robbery gone wrong? Or were there much darker motives at play? Get ready to delve into the mysteries of this case. One that, while officially solved, continues to pique the curiosity of countless individuals who suspect that there's more than meets the eye. Amanda Grace Byers was welcomed into the world on July 31, 1987, in Muskegon, Michigan, by her loving parents Phil and Robin Byers. She was blessed with an older brother, James, and an elder sister named Amber. As the youngest in the family, Amanda was enveloped in love, and in return never hesitated to bestow kindness upon others. She started school in Indianapolis, Indiana, before moving to Elkhart, Indiana, in 1995 with her family. Amanda graduated from Elkhart Christian Academy in 2006, and she furthered her education at Pensacola Christian College in Pensacola, Florida, where she earned an associate's degree in 2008. Described as both beautiful and graceful, Amanda exuded confidence and grace in all that she did. Her spirit of never giving up was a testament to her character, and throughout her life she steadfastly held on to her faith in God. Her family's strong Christian values, particularly her father's role as a pastor at the First Baptist Church in Elkhart, deeply influenced her. With a radiant smile that was her trademark, Amanda had a passion for uniting people and their faith in Jesus. It was only fitting that she would choose a life partner who shared her strong Christian values. And so she found Davy Blackburn. Davy, born on November 2, 1985, in Tuscaloosa, embarked on his educational journey at Tuscaloosa County High School before transferring to Shades Valley High School during his father's tenure as a pastor at Brookview Wesleyan Church in Birmingham, Alabama. He pursued higher education at Southern Wesleyan University in South Carolina, where he graduated with a degree in religion and media communication. Amanda and Davy met on a blind date set up by Amanda's sister, Amber, who was dating Davy's best friend, Gavin. It was October 1, 2005, and they all attended a concert featuring the Christian band Hawk Nelson. Although they didn't expect the date to go well, it turned out to be the beginning of something special. Their relationship moved quickly, but it faced the challenge of being long distance. They were both attending different colleges, and they could only see each other during breaks, typically for periods of about 2 weeks at a time. To make it work, they even sought counseling to improve their communication. Despite the distance, they knew they had found the one in each other and made the most of the time they could spend together. Davy saw Amanda as the missing piece that completed his life in a unique and irreplaceable way. Aside from Davy, Amanda shared an incredibly close bond with her sister, Amber, to the extent that they confided in each other about everything. They experienced significant life moments side by side, whether it was running marathons together or walking down the aisle together with their father. On August 1, 2008, Amanda and Davy Blackburn tied the knot shortly after Amanda's graduation. Following their nuptials, the couple initially established their home in Greenville, South Carolina, where Davy undertook the role of an assistant pastor at New Spring Church. However, the tug of their previous home grew stronger, prompting their return to Indianapolis by 2012. Together, this young couple embarked on a journey of creating Resonant Church, an institution designed to offer worship and guidance to young individuals, with its message finely tuned to resonate with the hearts of the youth. Amanda and Davy were both deeply committed to their church, with Davy serving as the pastor. Collectively, they invested a significant portion of their time in counseling and guiding the church community. They engaged in extensive discussions on topics such as relationship advice, marital challenges, and intimate relationships, drawing from their own experiences and faith to offer support and guidance to those in need. Alongside the church, their own family began to flourish as on July 28, 2014, the couple welcomed their son, Weston, into the world. As expected, Amanda proved to be an exceptional mother, dedicating all her time and love to her precious child. Therefore, the decision to expand their family further was an easy one. Amanda became pregnant for the second time in 2015. Although they never underwent an official test to determine the gender, both Davy and Amanda were convinced that their second child would be a girl. They even selected the name Everett for the baby, who was expected to arrive on May 18, 2016. Tragically, Amanda would never live to see that day. On the fateful morning of November 10, 2015, just shortly after 8:30 a.m., the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department received a distressing 911 call from Davy Blackburn. He had found his wife, Amanda, who was 12 weeks pregnant, collapsed inside their residence. In response to the urgent call, Indianapolis police officers swiftly arrived at the Blackburn residence, situated at the 2800 block of Sunnyfield Court on the northwest side of Indianapolis. They initiated an inquiry seeking to understand the sequence of events leading up to this tragic discovery. According to his account, the day began like any other. He awoke at approximately 4:30 a.m., dedicated time to reading his Bible, and subsequently departed for LA Fitness Gym around 6 a.m. He explained that he had left the door unlocked due to the fact that, at the time, they possessed only one house key, which was attached to his wife's keyring. Davey explained that he had spent approximately an hour at the gym and then concluded his workout session, starting his drive back home. During his drive, he was engrossed in a phone conversation with a friend, which continued even after he arrived home around 7:30 a.m. To avoid disturbing Amanda and their 15-month-old son, Weston, Davey opted to stay in his car in the driveway to finish up his conversation. His phone conversation came to an end around 8:20 a.m., and he made his way into the house and stumbled upon a scene straight out of a horror movie. On the living room floor, Amanda was lying face down, unconscious and covered in blood. Davey said he was initially uncertain about what had transpired, believing that Amanda might have fainted due to a dizzy spell and that a decorative ladder in the living room had accidentally fallen on her. However, as he looked closer, he noticed that her pants were removed. Her underwear was neatly folded under her left thigh, and her shirt was pulled over her head, as if somebody was trying to take it off. Although she was lying in a pool of blood, she was still breathing. Deeply concerned about the safety of their 15-month-old son, Davey ran upstairs to reach Weston's room, where he found the child safe and unharmed in his crib. Overwhelmed by a flood of emotions, he promptly dialed 911 to request urgent assistance. When they entered the house, officers discovered Amanda in the exact condition Davey had described. She was clinging to life, and paramedics engaged in a relentless battle to resuscitate her. When that failed, they rushed her to the hospital in hopes of saving both her and her unborn child, racing against time. With this critical situation unfolding, the investigation swung into motion. Even though suspicion had never been directed at Davey, it was standard procedure to commence the investigation with a close examination of the spouse. So the investigators visited the LA Fitness Gym where Davey had been that morning. Following a thorough confirmation of his alibi, Davey was quickly cleared of any involvement in the murder. With this crucial step completed, the investigative efforts could be concentrated on the crime scene itself. The officers instantly observed a series of irregularities within the scene. Amanda's wallet and credit cards were strewn across the floor. A pack of Swisher Sweet cigars was conspicuously placed on the kitchen counter, and a decorative lamp had been knocked over in close proximity to where Amanda lay, all of which pointed to a violent struggle. The presence of the cigars was particularly perplexing as neither Amanda nor Davey were smokers. This scene bore the haunting marks of the violence and confrontation that had transpired just hours earlier. While investigators were diligently searching for clues, Amanda was fighting for her life. Tragically, she wouldn't survive. On November 11, 2015, she was taken off life support and passed away, along with her unborn baby, leaving her family in mourning over her tragic murder and desperate for justice. The autopsy report unveiled the cruel and horrific extent of the violence inflicted upon Amanda. Contrary to Davey's initial impression that she might have been struck in the head, the report indicated that she had sustained 3 gunshot wounds, one to her arm, another to her upper back, and the fatal one to the back of her head. In addition to the gunshot wounds, there were telling signs of trauma, including scratches on her left cheek, a split lip, and the loss of a lower tooth, painting a distressing picture of the physical ordeal she had endured. Throughout the crime scene, extensive DNA swabs were conducted, spanning the entirety of the house. This methodical investigation led to the discovery of a variety of items and pieces of evidence, such as a roll of duct tape, earphones, a bullet, and scattered change on the floor. Collectively, these findings painted a vivid picture of the chaos of the crime scene. Additionally, the caliber of the bullets was identified as either a .38 or 9mm, providing a crucial clue regarding the potential weapon utilized in this tragic incident. Another vital clue emerged within the confines of the home. Amanda's cell phone was located in her bedroom, and upon examination, investigators noticed that she had received an email alert at 7:53 a.m. on the morning of the home invasion, notifying her about a suspicious transaction involving her Chase debit card. Subsequent investigation revealed that the debit card had been stolen. This digital breadcrumb initiated a chain of investigative steps that would eventually lead the detectives to a series of ATM transactions. These transactions, in turn, led to the discovery of surveillance footage capturing a suspect in the act of attempting to withdraw money. The individual in the footage had wrapped a pink shirt around his face in an effort to conceal his identity, marking a significant breakthrough in the investigation. He was also wearing a dark-colored vest. This evidence unmistakably indicated that the home invasion had, in fact, been a robbery that tragically escalated into a deadly confrontation. Around the same time, a series of burglaries in the same vicinity began to reveal a pattern too conspicuous to overlook. On that very morning of November 10th at 5:23 a.m., Jacola Searsbrook, a resident of the same neighborhood, placed a call to 911 to report a break-in. She recounted to the police that she had woken at 4:30 a.m., only to discover her cell phone missing from her bedroom. As she ventured further, she discovered that her sliding glass door was ajar, her potted plants had been disturbed, and her Apple MacBook, purse, headphones, car keys, and even a pack of Swisher cigars were all gone. In an even more disturbing turn of events, her 2007 Chrysler Sebring was absent from the parking lot. The investigation also unveiled that the apartment's surveillance cameras captured still images of 3 individuals entering the premises. Although their identities remained undisclosed, it was determined that the burglars had gained access by cutting the porch screen and subsequently opening the sliding door. However, they had disabled the camera during the actual burglary, further obscuring their identification. The second 911 call that morning was placed at 8:17 a.m. by Allison Becker, a neighbor who resided on the same street as Davy and Amanda. She reported that she had not been at home that morning and returned to discover that her residence had fallen victim to a burglary. The thieves made off with 4 televisions, a MacBook Pro, a Tiffany pearl necklace, a pink woman's sweater, an AT&T remote, a bag of oranges, and a few bed sheets, likely used to wrap the stolen items for transport. As the investigation unfolded, it became apparent that this apartment was also equipped with a security camera, which, much like the others, had been disabled. This time at 5:36 a.m. detectives pieced together that the burglars had entered the apartment by cutting through the porch screen and somehow managed to unlock the deadbolt securing the sliding glass door. To add to the unnerving atmosphere, it appeared that the robbers had settled in, consuming wine and beer before departing, leaving the empty bottles behind. These unsettling actions hinted at a disturbing level of confidence the burglars had. Detectives at this point believed that the same group might have been responsible for the string of burglaries in the area and could have been responsible for the death of Amanda and her unborn baby. As the police conducted inquiries throughout the neighborhood to seek information on any suspicious activities from the day of the robberies, they indeed found several individuals who had witnessed unusual occurrences. One neighbor recounted that just before 7 a.m. on the ill-fated morning, she had seen a man dressed entirely in black, with a hood concealing his head, walking in front of her house. Another witness recalled seeing the same man engaged in a loud conversation on his phone, with a t-shirt pulled over his face. By 7:10 a.m., yet another neighbor reported observing a Chrysler Sebring pull up alongside the man. The man was seen entering the car, which then quickly departed. This information expanded the investigative net, eventually revealing another crucial clue. Surveillance footage from one resident's camera captured both the car and the man. Another witness came forward to report that on the morning of November 10, 2015, she heard 2 loud noises accompanied by a woman's screams, a chilling detail that led the police to theorize that this might have been the moment when Amanda was attacked. The stolen Chrysler Sebring emerged as a pivotal link, unmistakably connecting the dots between the series of burglaries. Remarkably, it was discovered abandoned by the side of the road, not far from the Blackburn residence, on November 11, 2015, the very day Amanda tragically passed away. A comprehensive search of the vehicle led to the discovery of some of the stolen items alongside an ATM receipt, indicating a denied transaction attempt of $500 conducted using Amanda's debit card at 6:36 a.m. on November 10th. This evidence was supported by ATM surveillance footage capturing a man with his face concealed in a pink sweater, as previously mentioned. However, this time another significant piece of evidence emerged. The same man was seen in surveillance footage of a nearby ATM at 6:54 a.m., successfully completing a transaction for $400. This evidence strongly suggested that Amanda had been attacked almost immediately after Davy left the house that morning. Nonetheless, DNA samples were collected from the car and subsequently forwarded for testing, with the results screened through Cody's to identify any potential matches. By November 17, 2015, investigators received a breakthrough, a DNA match that finally put a suspect on their radar. The DNA discovered in the car was linked to a 21-year-old man named Jalen Watson. Intriguingly, Jalen had only been released from prison on August 6, 2015, following a previous conviction for burglary, and he was currently on parole. Delving into Jalen's Facebook account, detectives unearthed a connection between him and a 24-year-old man named Dino Gordon, who also happened to be on parole for burglary. The plot continued to thicken as the investigators tracked the location data associated with the phone numbers of both these men. On the morning of November 10th, the unfolding sequence of events began to reveal itself through the location pings from their phones. At 4:40 a.m., roughly coinciding with the timing of the first robbery, their phones pinged off the tower nearest to the initial home. This pattern recurred with the second robbery and chillingly corresponded to the estimated time of Amanda's murder at 6:25 a.m. The digital footprints left behind continued to be traced, leading investigators to the towers closest to the ATMs where Amanda's stolen debit card was used at 6:39 a.m. and then once more at 6:54 a.m. Gradually, the pieces of the puzzle were coming together, painting a clearer picture of the crime spree. Deeper scrutiny of Jalen's communications ultimately led to the discovery of the third and youngest member of the burglar trio. An 18-year-old named Larry Taylor Jr. A review of the communication records unveiled conversations that implicated Larry in the crime that morning. Born in 1997, relatively little was known about Larry, who would soon take on a central role in Amanda Blackburn's murder. Similar to his associates, Larry also had a criminal history that included misdemeanor charges, one of which involved an incident of public nudity and indecency where he had exposed himself to a woman in a parking lot. Investigators proceeded to obtain the phone number Jalen had provided for his parole board, which turned out to belong to his older sister, Jernita. When the police spoke with her, she disclosed that on the night prior to the tragic events, Larry, Jalen, and Dino had been hanging out at her apartment. They departed the apartment at 3:30 a.m. on November 10th. Additionally, she shared with the authorities that one of the three men had been wearing a dark vest that morning, corroborating a description provided by a witness. Jernita also handed over a 9mm pistol that had been brought to the apartment, likely by either Jalen or Dino, and left under her bed. On that fateful morning, the trio's criminal activities began with burglaries, which evolved into something far more sinister in no time. According to a confidential informant whose identity remained undisclosed, Larry, Jalen, and Dino had ventured out in the early morning hours with the intention of breaking into a residence to obtain some money. Larry had also brought along a .38 revolver with him. They arrived at Jacola Searsbrook's apartment on the east side of Indianapolis on foot. Larry was the first to gain entry into Jacola's apartment and then let the other two inside through the front door. Following the theft of numerous items, the trio fled the scene. Using Jacola's car for transportation, they initially drove to the residence of Jalen's child's mother, located near 38th and Kessler Boulevard, with the intention of him being dropped off there. However, as he was unable to establish contact with the woman, they departed and headed to a nearby neighborhood to engage in further burglaries. While in the neighborhood, the men noticed a house with a back porch that appeared vulnerable to intrusion. This particular residence was situated on Sunnyfield Court and belonged to Allison Becker, who was not present at home during that time. The men parked the car and gained entry to the home through the patio door. After spending some time inside consuming alcohol and stealing numerous items, they eventually exited the apartment to load the pilfered possessions into their car. It was at this point that Larry informed the others that he had observed someone departing from a neighboring home, leading them to believe that this residence might be unoccupied. Once they had completed loading their vehicle, the three of them drove to that particular home. It was the marital home of Amanda and Davy. Upon entering the residence through the unlocked front door, the men immediately spotted a purse on the kitchen counter, taking the money it contained and dividing it among themselves. Additionally, they confiscated some credit cards found there. As they continued to search the rest of the home, they unexpectedly encountered Amanda. The men formulated a plan to use Amanda's credit cards at an ATM to obtain money. Their initial attempt to persuade Amanda to accompany them was met with her refusal, and when they tried to physically compel her to leave, she resisted and dropped to the ground. So it was decided that Jalen and Dino would go to the ATM, while Larry would remain behind with Amanda and her son, who was still asleep in his room upstairs. The informant further disclosed that Jalen and Dino proceeded to drive to a nearby Chase ATM, but they encountered difficulties in using the card with that particular machine. Jalen and Dino then called Larry, who apparently provided them with the correct ATM passcode. From there, they drove to a different Chase Bank ATM located in the vicinity of 86th Street and Ditch Road. After parking there, Jalen exited the vehicle and approached the ATM. Given the cold weather, he wrapped the pink sweater that had been acquired from Allison's residence around his face. On this occasion, he successfully withdrew $400 from the ATM, which was then divided between Jalen and Dino. Meanwhile, Larry placed several calls to Dino, expressing his frustration and demanding that they return to the Blackburn residence to pick him up. Eventually, they complied with his request, but by the time they got there, Larry had already left the Blackburn house and was walking down the street with a backpack he had taken from the home. Larry was reportedly in a state of panic and urged the others to simply leave him behind. He instructed Jalen to drive to an apartment complex situated at 56 Georgetown, where they left him at the residence of an individual referred to as Shy. While en route, Larry disclosed to them that he had attempted to sleep with Amanda, but she had rejected his advances. As a result, he had shot her once, and as she fell down, he shot her again in the back of her head. Eventually, the men abandoned Jacola's car near 38th Street and Brookwood Drive in Indianapolis and went their separate ways. The diligent efforts of the Indianapolis police combined with the mounting evidence culminated in the arrest of all 3 individuals responsible for Amanda's tragic death. Just 2 weeks after the incident, Larry faced a total of 13 charges, including murder, burglary, criminal confinement while armed with a deadly weapon, and robbery resulting in serious bodily injury. His accomplice, Jalen, was charged with 10 offenses which included murder, burglary, robbery resulting in serious bodily injury, and auto theft. Initially, the third accomplice, Dino, was charged with burglary and theft, but as the case developed, he too faced charges of murder. The dark saga of Larry Taylor extended even further, with revelations about his potential involvement in other heinous crimes coming to light. On November 4, 2015, just a week before Amanda's murder, the lifeless body of Rolando Gonzalez Hernandez, a 27-year-old Mexican man, was discovered next to his car at his apartment complex, having been fatally shot in the head. Witnesses shared with authorities that Larry had openly boasted about a robbery and shooting that had occurred at the same apartment complex, using derogatory language to describe the victim based on his ethnicity. According to Larry, the robbery had produced a measly sum of $10 from Rolando's wallet. Additionally, it was alleged that Larry had confided in other witnesses about breaking into a woman's home and subjecting her to a terrifying assault at gunpoint. Despite these allegations, Larry was not charged with these crimes due to insufficient evidence. However, there was no escaping the consequences of his actions in the case of Amanda. Yet the legal procedure to bring Larry and his accomplices to justice was not only complex but long drawn out, spanning 2 to 3 years of legal maneuvering, plea negotiations, and the anticipation of a trial. Ultimately, Dino and Jalen reached agreements that required them to testify against Larry during his bench trial. In exchange for their cooperation, the murder charges against them were dismissed. Jalen was sentenced to 29 years in prison, while Dino received a 30-year sentence. The trial of Larry Taylor Jr. didn't start until December 2021. However, when it finally did, an unusual situation arose. His defense attorney successfully persuaded the court to withhold information about Amanda's unborn child from the jury, even though Larry had originally been charged with the baby's death as well. Nevertheless, the jurors somehow discovered Amanda's pregnancy during the trial, prompting the judge to declare a mistrial due to concerns that it might evoke sympathy from the jury. A second trial was scheduled for June 2022. However, another obstacle arose. Some jurors had become aware of the previous mistrial and were discussing it among themselves. As a result, the judge declared another mistrial, further prolonging the legal proceedings. The third attempt to try Larry for Amanda's murder was scheduled for October 2022. In this trial, the prosecution relied on the testimonies of Dino and Jalen, cell phone data, and other witness accounts. Thankfully, the trial proceeded without any more unexpected revelations, and by September 2022, a verdict was reached. Ultimately, Larry Taylor was convicted on various charges, which encompassed murder, burglary, theft, criminal confinement, auto theft, and unlawful possession of a handgun. The court sentenced Larry to 86 years of imprisonment, ultimately concluding a chaotic legal odyssey linked to the tragic loss of Amanda Grace Blackburn and her unborn baby. The verdict undoubtedly brought solace to Amanda's grieving family. Davey even went as far as to express his forgiveness toward his wife's killers. However, the irreplaceable loss of Amanda remains a permanent void. Sadly, Amanda's son Weston has had to grow up without the presence of his mother, having only been allowed to spend 15 months with her. Weston celebrated his 9th birthday this year and has been thriving under the care of his father, who has found a new path in life. In December 2017, 2 years after Amanda's tragic death, Davey entered into a new chapter by marrying Christy Monroy, a single mother who attended Resonant Church and shared the same CrossFit gym with Davey. On November 4, 2019, Christy, who had a daughter named Natalia from her previous marriage, gave birth to Davy's son, Cohen David Parker Blackburn. Currently, the blended family is flourishing, as is evident from their active social media presence and blog posts. Usually, this would be the conclusion of our story. However, in this case, there are lingering unanswered questions and missing pieces of the puzzle that have left some people wondering if there's more to the story. Today, we will explore the alternate theories that have piqued people's curiosity, allowing you to form your own opinion. So without further delay, let's delve into the uncharted territory we've previously left unexplored. Before we proceed, we want to mention that most of this information consists of allegations or rumors, and Davy has never been under suspicion in the official investigation. We want to make it clear that we do not intend to spread misinformation or support any kind of propaganda. We apologize if anything we have said in this video has hurt somebody's feelings, as it is not our intention to do so. Some people believe that Davy might have been involved in his wife's murder and that he was the one who orchestrated it. Several factors have raised questions about his innocence. For starters, it was revealed during the investigation that just 2 months before Amanda's death, Davy had taken out a significant life insurance policy on her. Strangely, this policy came into effect after a mere 8 weeks. Coincidentally, right after Amanda's death. Davy benefited greatly from this, but was it intentional? No one knows. Coming back to the day of the home invasion, there were some unusual deviations in Davy's routine. Those familiar with Davy would attest that he typically left for the gym at 5:30 a.m. But on this particular day, he was half an hour late. His wake-up time was no different than usual, leaving some to wonder about the reason for this anomaly. Furthermore, his workouts typically spanned an hour, but on this occasion, they lasted only 45 minutes, excluding the driving time. Additionally, some find it implausible that Davy would sit in his car for an entire hour without entering his home. In light of these anomalies, certain theories have emerged speculating that he might have been waiting for his wife's tragic fate to unfold. The 911 call in this case is a matter that has drawn significant attention among web sleuths, and for good reason. There are several troubling aspects to it. First and foremost, the time it took Davy to call 911 is unusual. He waited for almost 12 minutes before seeking help, despite discovering his spouse in a severely injured state and covered in blood. This extended delay raises questions. Moreover, the most unsettling part of the 911 call is Davy's strangely composed demeanor. While on the call, as the dispatcher connected to another line, Davy remained eerily silent. He made no effort to wake Amanda or communicate with her, even though he knew she was still breathing. This behavior is highly unusual given the severity of the situation. It's equally perplexing that Davy initially thought Amanda had been in an accident when in reality she had been viciously attacked and left for dead. These factors contribute to the mystery and speculation surrounding the case. There's another aspect of this case that has raised questions among some observers. They have pointed out how Davy appeared to be capitalizing on this tragedy. During Amanda's funeral, he continuously tweeted the hashtag, #NothingIsWasted. Shortly after the funeral, he legally registered the domain name Nothing Is Wasted, and even used that quote to brand her tombstone. He went on to release a podcast, a book, and a blog, all under the same brand name, detailing his personal journey through Amanda's death and the healing process. Critics pointed out that some of his statements and blog posts seemed to revolve around himself, which has raised questions about potential narcissism. For instance, just hours after the arrest in the case, he released a statement in which he expressed rapid forgiveness for the individuals responsible for the death of his spouse. For some, the speed at which he chose to forgive those who had essentially torn his world apart was unsettling. His quote, "The best is yet to come," has led to speculation and discussions about Davy's motivations and behavior. Comparisons drawn from Davy's posts have highlighted how he sometimes appears distant in his narratives. Some people have observed that he presents the murder in a very matter-of-fact way and rarely mentions his unborn child, who tragically never had a chance to come into the world. On multiple occasions, Davy has expressed that while the incident has been painful for him, he wouldn't change any of it, and he believes that Amanda is where she needs to be, by Jesus' side. It's possible that Davy, as a man of faith, has accepted everything life has thrown his way, no matter how tragic. He might genuinely be grateful for the life he has been given, despite the immense losses he has suffered. However, whether coincidental or intentional, some of his behavior and statements have raised red flags for certain individuals. In a bizarre coincidence, just 2 weeks before Amanda's tragic death, Davy delivered a sermon in which he acted out a murder scene, repeatedly shooting someone in the back with an airsoft gun. This performance was intended to illustrate how worship could be metaphorically used as a weapon. If this video wasn't eerie enough, another incident left many people shocked. In 2018, Davey and his current wife, Christy, dressed as robbers for a Halloween party and even posted pictures on social media. What added to the unease was the presence of a ladder in the picture, bearing eerie similarities to the circumstances of Amanda's murder. This costume choice, coming just a few years after such a tragic event, raised numerous questions and concerns. Concerns have also been raised by some individuals regarding how swiftly authorities cleared Davey of suspicion. As a renowned local pastor with connections to influential figures and law enforcement, some believe that Davey was never thoroughly investigated. Additionally, theories began to circulate based on Davey and Amanda's own Q&A videos, in which they discussed their marital difficulties and how they overcame them to become soulmates. Some people speculated that their marital problems led Davey to seek a way to eliminate his wife. However, it's important to note that while these theories sound like elements of a dark plot, they remain purely circumstantial and have never been substantiated. In fact, it's essential to acknowledge certain gaps in these theories, with a major one being, if Davey was involved in the murder, why did none of the individuals involved, Jalen, Dino, or Larry, ever mention his name? Ultimately, we leave it to our audience to decide whether the truth lies in what's already known or if there's something concealed beneath the surface. As we conclude our story here, what are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe Davey had any involvement in his wife's murder? Or do you consider these allegations to be entirely baseless, with the actual killer already behind bars? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. August 20th, 1987, marked a tragic day for North Greenbush, as the lifeless body of a young woman was found on the muddy banks of the Hudson River. This unfortunate victim was later identified as Diana Disso, a 19-year-old who had been seen leaving her boyfriend's Albany apartment in a distressed state the previous evening. While the identification process was swift, the investigation into her murder proved to be a lengthy and challenging endeavor, spanning a daunting 17-year period. To unravel the mystery surrounding this chilling incident, we must retrace our steps to the very location where it all began. North Greenbush, situated in upstate New York, is a charming town renowned for its picturesque beauty. Nestled along the eastern banks of the Hudson River, this suburban community offers a serene and family-oriented environment. With a population of just over 13,000, North Greenbush embodies the essence of small-town living. However, even in such an idyllic setting, dark secrets can lurk beneath the surface, serving as a reminder that no place is immune to the presence of heinous crimes. On that fateful day, August 20th, 1987, the New York State Police Department received a distress call from a concerned passerby who had stumbled upon a lifeless body on the banks of the Hudson River in North Greenbush, New York. John Murray, a seasoned homicide detective from the NYSP, promptly responded to the call, making his way down the trails leading to the river. As he approached the scene, he was met with the sight of a motionless woman lying face down, partially submerged in the water, her body resting upon the muddy embankment of the Hudson River. During the initial examination, all indications pointed towards a homicide. It seemed that someone had intentionally tried to dispose of the victim's body in the river, but their plan was thwarted when it got caught on a piece of wood near the riverbank. The detective was disheartened to find no identifying information except for a brush. An urgent bulletin was promptly issued, and the news was broadcasted on local television channels. Detective Murray held on to hope that someone would step forward to identify this unfortunate victim. Marian Disso, a resident of Colony, New York, found watching the news on television particularly distressing as she hadn't heard from her 19-year-old daughter, Diana Disso, since the previous night. Fearing the worst, the family contacted the police, who connected them with the investigators working on the Hudson River case, initiating the identification process. Once the identification was completed, the investigators eagerly awaited the autopsy results for further insights. The report confirmed that Diana had been strangled and also revealed the presence of unidentified bodily fluid on her body, along with possible signs of assault. Unfortunately, no additional evidence pertaining to the killer could be obtained. Detectives even tried to retrace Diana's steps before her murder. It was discovered that on the evening of August 19th, 1987, Diana had a heated argument with her undisclosed boyfriend. In a fit of anger, she stormed out of his apartment in Albany, New York. Sadly, this was the last time anyone saw her alive. Although the boyfriend was not considered a suspect, the detectives were unable to identify any other individuals on their list of suspects. Consequently, the case eventually went cold, leaving her grieving family longing for justice. In 2004, a remarkable 17 years after the discovery of Diana Dezos, the case was reopened by Dave Madden, a senior investigator from the New York State Police Department. By this point in time, advancements in DNA technology had progressed enough for Madden to send the unidentified bodily fluid sample to the New York State Police Crime Lab for further examination. Dr. Allison Eastman, a forensic analyst with the New York Police, conducted thorough tests and successfully generated a complete STR-DNA profile from the sample. On May 24, 2004, she entered the profile into Cody's, leading to a groundbreaking revelation. Not only did the profile already exist in the database, but the individual associated with it was already serving time in prison. The bodily fluid matched that of a convicted felon named Ray Killer. Although Killer had no apparent connection to Diana, his criminal history made him a prime suspect in this case. In 1989, Keller had committed a violent assault against a 16-year-old girl, resulting in a prison sentence of 8 to 25 years. Following this significant breakthrough, Dave Madden joined forces with two other NYSP detectives, Steve Ortiz and Deborah Comer, to pursue this lead. Before directly engaging with the suspect, the detectives decided to first speak with the now-adult victim of Killer's previous crime. While she had survived the attack, it shared unsettling similarities with Diana Dezos' murder, which had occurred just 2 years earlier. Both victims had been assaulted and strangled. Although there was no direct link between these two cases, the importance of Killer's conviction cannot be overstated in relation to Diana's murder. Without it, Killer's DNA may have never been present in the system. Armed with substantial evidence connecting Ray Killer to Diana's case, investigators were ready to interrogate him about her murder. However, they still needed his confession to strengthen their case. There was a possibility that Killer could claim to have had a personal relationship with Diana, but deny any involvement in her murder. Prior to directly approaching Ray Killer, the detective sought guidance from psychologist Richard Hamill, who had spent 20 years conversing with convicts. They were hopeful that Hamill's expertise would assist them in delving into Ray Killer's psyche and encouraging him to open up about the case. On December 17, 2004, Detective Madden and Ortiz conducted an interview with Ray Killer. The detectives explicitly informed him that they were aware of his encounter with Diana Dezos in 1987, but Killer denied recognizing the name. Despite Killer's repeated denials and lies, forensic evidence clearly placed him at the scene with Diana. Therefore, when the detectives decided to reveal the trump card they held, the DNA evidence, Killer finally broke down. With the audio recording in progress, Killer recounted the events of August 1987 when Diana Dezos tragically lost her life. Killer admitted that on that August evening, 17 years prior, he was under the influence of both alcohol and drugs. He stated that while driving around, noticed a young woman hitchhiking along Central Avenue in Albany and chose to pull over. Killer then drove the car to a wooded area in North Greenbush near the Hudson River. After assaulting the vulnerable young woman, Killer unexpectedly allowed her to get dressed. However, it was a comment made by Diana Dezos at that moment that may have tragically sealed her fate. She mentioned that she was going to tell. Killer went on to explain that he was consumed by rage and continued to tighten his grip on Diana's neck until she stopped resisting. Convinced that she would succumb to his attack, Killer decided to dispose of her lifeless body in the river. Through a combination of patience and effective interrogation techniques, Detectives Madden and Ortiz achieved the confession they had been seeking, just as psychologist Hamill had predicted. Rensselaer County District Attorney Patricia Dangels and Deputy District Attorney Joe Abelov, who handled the prosecution, were dedicated to obtaining justice for Diana's family above all else. In 2005, Ray Killer ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder before Rensselaer County Court Judge Patrick J. McGrath. He was sentenced to 22 years to life in state prison on July 5, 2005, with the term to be served consecutively to his previous sentence. Although he appeared remorseful, the harsh truth remains that he cannot reverse the tragic loss of Diana, or erase the suffering he caused her family. On January 13, 1972, life in the Randall household was proceeding as usual. 32-year-old Juanita Randall was busy in the kitchen preparing a meal for the family, while her 9-year-old daughter Debbie Randall was bubbling with excitement. Debbie was all set to join her friends for a fun time at the nearby playground, just a short 2-block stroll from their home. But before Debbie could leave, Juanita had a simple request. She asked Debbie to pick up some washing powder from the laundromat across the road on her way back. Little did she know, as she bid her daughter goodbye with a smile, that this would be the last time she'd see her cherished child. Debbie, full of happiness, headed off to play with her friends, but sadly, she never made it back home. What could have happened to young Debbie on that ordinary day in 1972? And where did she disappear to after leaving for the playground? Marietta is a city located in Georgia, USA, with a population of approximately 60,000 people. The community in Marietta is known for its diversity and strong sense of civic pride. Residents here often engage in various community activities and events, creating a welcoming and vibrant atmosphere. The city offers a mix of historic charm and modern amenities, making it an attractive place to live for a diverse group of individuals and families. Marietta's population rate reflects its appeal as a desirable community in the state of Georgia. Let's start the story and take a journey back in time to August 21st, 1962, when a lovely little girl came into the world. Debbie Randall was born to John Randall and Juanita Wheeler Randall in the cozy town of Marietta, Georgia. She attended Pine Forest Elementary School in Georgia, where she was in 3rd grade, and her kind and gentle nature made her a beloved friend among her classmates. Beyond school walls in the tight-knit community, she was adored by everyone, and people often brought dolls for her when they visited her home as tokens of their affection. Debbie also had a big brother named Marvin Randall, and their bond was something truly special. Marvin loved his little sister and would always go above and beyond to make her happy. Whatever Debbie wished for, Marvin made it happen, highlighting the strong and caring connection they shared as siblings. Debbie was a source of joy for her family, and she had grand dreams and a heart filled with adventure. However, her life was cut short and never truly got the chance to fully chase those dreams and live life to the fullest. It was an ordinary evening on January 13th, 1972, when Debbie was at her home in Marietta, Georgia, with her mother Juanita and her brother Marvin, who was feeling a bit under the weather, so he was resting in his room. It was shaping up to be an ordinary evening. Juanita was in the kitchen, busy preparing dinner, while John, Debbie's father, had yet to return home. Suddenly, with a burst of enthusiasm, Debbie went to her room, quickly dressed herself, and returned back to her mother with an eager request to go play at the nearby playground with her friends. This playground was just a stone's throw away, a mere half block and a quick 57 feet from their house. Right across the road, there was a laundromat. Juanita remembered that she had forgotten to grab some washing powder from there. So, she granted Debbie's request to play. She asked her to run a small errand. "While you're out, dear," she said, "please don't forget to pick up the washing powder we need." With a cheerful nod, Debbie happily ventured outside to join her friends at the playground, and didn't forget to promise her mother that she'd return home before dinner time. Little did they know that this simple request would mark the beginning of a mystery that would haunt their lives for years to come. The playground was just a mere 5-minute stroll for Debbie. Her usual routine was to play for about an hour and then head back home. So Juanita naturally thought she'd be back in roughly an hour and a half. However, when 2 hours slipped by with no sign of Debbie, Juanita began to wonder. She thought, maybe she's at the laundromat, imagining the crowd there was causing the delay. But as 3 hours came and went, the sun sat below the horizon. Juanita's concern grew stronger. This was far from the normal. As the evening darkened, Juanita's worry also deepened. Debbie had always been punctual and never missed her curfew before. By 9:45 p.m., when John, Debbie's father, finally arrived home, Juanita couldn't contain her concern any longer. She anxiously asked him if he had seen or been with Debbie on his way home. But John's face mirrored her distress when he said that he had no information about Debbie's whereabouts. The worry that had begun as a tiny spark now blazed into a full-fledged concern for their beloved daughter. At the moment, listening to the voice, Martin also emerged from his room, and he couldn't help but notice the worry etched across his parents being concerned. He inquired about what was happening. Juanita, torn between protecting her ailing son and the growing anxiety over Debbie's absence, finally broke down in tears. She told Martin that Debbie hadn't returned home, and she and John were going out to search for her. With a heavy heart, Juanita asked Martin to stay behind, keeping an eye on the house and let them know immediately if Debbie returned. It was a moment of heart-wrenching decisions for the family. Fear and confusion swept through the neighborhood as the Randall family sprang into action to find young Debbie. Martin, being a caring older brother, couldn't bear to stay home and do nothing. He roamed the neighborhood, approaching people with questions burning in his mind. "Have you seen Debbie? Do you know where she is?" The response was unanimous shock. No one could believe that their beloved little Debbie was missing without a trace. Some recalled glimpsing her as she left her house, but no one had seen her since. Meanwhile, Juanita and John hurried to the playground where Debbie went to play with her friends, but it was eerily deserted. All the children had already returned to their homes. Their next stop was the laundromat, where Juanita had asked Debbie to fetch washing powder. But it too was closed by then. The minutes ticked away, and every empty road and quiet street they searched seemed to amplify the silence of their daughter's absence. Where could their beloved Debbie have disappeared to? At a moment, Juanita stumbled upon a box of washing powder scattered on the road that led to their home. It was a moment of realization that something terribly wrong might have happened to her daughter. Overwhelmed by worry, Juanita couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She made the difficult decision to file a missing person report, determined to do everything in her power to find her daughter. However, the police explained that, as less than 24 hours had passed since Debbie went missing, they couldn't officially file the report just yet. Still, they promised to do their best to locate her. Despite this devastating setback, the Randall family was touched by the outpouring support from the community during this difficult time. The community sprang into action, launching a citywide search effort which involved approximately 4,000 volunteers. Martin also took to the streets posting flyers with a desperate plea for information about his missing sister. Debbie, who had a fondness for playing baseball with her brother, was dearly missed by her family, and Martin hoped that someone, somewhere, had seen or knew something that could bring her back home. At the same time, the police were equally determined to find Debbie. They visited the laundromat where the owner confirmed that Debbie had picked up the washing powder as instructed. But the question was, what could have transpired in those mere 5 minutes between her visit to the laundromat and her disappearance? The police also interviewed all of Debbie's friends who had been at the playground that day, but none had any information about her whereabouts. 16 long days passed, and yet there was no sign of Debbie. Juanita and John were still hoping, and waiting anxiously for their beloved daughter to return home safely. Among the dedicated searchers were a group of Southern Tech students who tirelessly assisted the police. After 16 days, on January 29, 1972, their unwavering efforts eventually led them to a tragic discovery on Johnson Ferry Road. On the other side of the woods, they found Debbie's lifeless, partially unclothed body. Her body bore the harrowing signs of a fierce struggle, as if she had fought with all her might until her very last breath to defend herself. It appeared that the heartless killer had used Debbie's own coat to silence her cries for help. Investigators believed that the perpetrator must have been stalking Debbie for some time, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. He eventually seized the opportunity, abducting and subjecting her to a horrifying ordeal at various locations, before ultimately discarding her lifeless body in the woods. This heartbreaking discovery left the community in deep sorrow, and Debbie's parents were overwhelmed with the grief at the sight of their beloved daughter's lifeless form. The coroner's examination revealed that she had been strangled and assaulted, bearing deep marks on her body that hinted at the immense pain she endured. During this examination, a significant discovery was made: an unidentified hair possibly belonging to her assailant. This find had the potential to be a breakthrough in the case. However, due to the limitations of medical technology in the 1970s, there was little they could do with the hair at the time. So it was carefully preserved, waiting for future advancements that might one day help uncover the identity of the person responsible for Debbie's tragic demise. As the days turned into months, detectives tirelessly pursued hundreds of leads, yet each one seemed to lead nowhere. Despite their dedicated efforts, the police found themselves in a frustrating loop, unable to uncover the vital clues needed to solve the case. These turn of events left the Randall family with haunting questions. What truly transpired on that tragic night? Who bore the responsibility for their daughter's demise? They grappled with not only the profound loss of their cherished Debbie, but also with the agonizing frustration of justice eluding them. For nearly 28 years, the puzzle of Debbie's murder remained without a solution. However, in 2001, fate intervened, giving the case a new chance. Detective Morris Nix, who couldn't shake the memory of this unsolved mystery, began to comb through old cold case files. As he pored over those documents, he stumbled upon Debbie's murder case. Diving back into the details, he felt like there were concealed aspects that hadn't been thoroughly examined. The initial 1972 investigation. Following his instincts, Detective Morse made the choice to reopen the case. He retrieved the evidence box, which had been tucked away for years, and inside it, he found an unidentified strand of hair that had been preserved with care. The FBI conducted numerous tests on it, but even with their efforts, they couldn't determine whose hair it was. The technology at the time just wasn't that advanced enough, so they decided to again wait for the day to finally bring the breakthrough in the case. This case stayed unresolved, but in 2015 it gained momentum again when Detective Morris volunteered for the Cobb County Cold Case Unit. He brought fresh eyes in the aid of advanced medical science, determined to crack the mystery that had baffled the police 46 years earlier. With the help of the media coverage which shone a spotlight on this old case, a woman named Sandra Walker emerged from the shadows. She had been one of the kids who played with Debbie on that fateful evening of January 13, 1972. Sandra bravely recounted her memories to the police. Although fear had kept her silent at the time, those memories were etched in her mind. She recounted nearly being run over by the man's speeding vehicle and the sensation of his eyes locked under her through the rear view mirror. She could still hear Debbie's desperate screams and see her kicking as the man forcibly pushed her back into his truck. All the memories still haunted her to this day. To engage the entire community and reignite their memories of that fateful night, the police enlisted the help of a graphic designer. With the street now transformed into a bus terminal, Jessica Knoll took a fresh perspective on the case. Freelance artist Amanda would dedicated months to crafting a visual representation of Debbie's last moments. Given Debbie's fondness for dolls, she chose to depict her story in the form of a doll, with her killer portrayed as the menacing monster in this tragic tale. This creative approach aimed to draw attention of the community once again and help uncover potential clues in the case. John, Debbie's father, held on to every newspaper article that recounted her disappearance, a constant reminder of the lingering sorrow and the mysteries that were left unsolved in their hearts. In the meantime, Detective Morris took a significant step by sending a piece of cloth, a circular one adorned with floral prints, which had been found on Debbie's body, to the Sorensen Forensic Lab for a fresh round of DNA analysis. Thanks to advancements in technology, they managed to construct a partial profile of an unknown male. However, they faced some challenges, but fortunately in 2019, with additional funding from the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, renewed DNA testing opened up new avenues for further investigation. Finally, in 2023, a breakthrough emerged as the police turned to the power of genetic genealogy. They enlisted DNA Labs International to conduct more tests aiming to create AS&P's profile by combing through public records and police resources. When the DNA matched to an individual, the investigators wasted no time and began building a family tree, painstakingly tracing down as many members from the assailant's family as possible. For this, the police went a step further, by reaching out to all of the killer's family members and requesting their DNA samples. To their surprise, the family agreed and cooperated willingly by providing their DNA for testing. When all the necessary tests were completed, the DNA evidence found on Debbie was a perfect match. The killer was identified as William B. Rose from Mableton. However, the twist was that Rose took his own life in 1974, just 2 years after he abducted and killed Debbie. At that time, he was only 24 years old. The reason behind Rose's decision to take his own life was driven by fear. Even during the previous arrest for an alcohol-related incident, he lived in constant fear, as revealed by one of his family members who spoke to the police. The authorities believed that Rose must have harbored a deep fear that one day the police might catch up to him for the terrible crime he committed. To avoid facing the consequences, he chose to end his life before that could happen. Remarkably, during the initial investigation, Rose had never even appeared on the police's radar, making his identity as Debbie's killer all the more unexpected. While it seemed unlikely that Rose and Debbie were close acquaintances, there was a connection through their families as both resided in the same complex. In that neighborhood, children often played together on a nearby playground. This suggested the possibility that Rose might have seen Debbie on previous occasions, and when the opportunity presented itself, he carried out his sinister plan. To definitively confirm Rose as the real killer, the police, with the family's consent, exhumed his body after nearly 5 decades. They conducted various tests, and the results left no room for doubt that William B. Rose was indeed the perpetrator, who tragically took the life of 9-year-old Debbie Randall in a horrific manner. The long-awaited revelation of the perpetrator's identity brought closure to the case, but it was bittersweet. Sadly, Debbie Randall's parents, Juanita and John, never learned that the mystery of their daughter's death had finally been solved. Juanita passed away in 2018 after battling with leukemia, and John followed in 2022. Losing a child, especially at such a young age, is a pain beyond words. This family had waited patiently for decades, hoping for answers. Detective Broad acknowledged that while this information provided closure, it could never replace the profound sorrow of losing Debbie Randall. After a relentless pursuit of justice for his sister spanning 5 decades, Debbie's brother Marvin expressed his heartfelt sentiments, saying, "I wish my mother was here. But I know she's in heaven now, and it's finally over. We want to say thank you to all of you for making this day possible. We wish that Debbie's soul finds eternal peace. What are your thoughts on this case? Why would Rose have killed little Debbie? Was that just because he got a chance that day? Or was it already planned? We'd love to hear from you. 16-year-old Rebecca Watts, known to most as Becky, had last been seen by her family the previous morning. She had left her home in Crown Hill, Bristol with her tablet, phone, and laptop. She had not taken anything else or spare clothes with her. She hadn't told anybody where she was going, and she wasn't responding to text messages and calls. This was completely out of character for Becky. She had never behaved this way or stayed out too late. She had spoken with her friend the day before, who said she had been her normal self and nothing seemed unusual or off about her demeanor. There was nothing to indicate that she had planned to run away. Becky had been born on the 3rd of June, 1998 to parents Darren and Tanya. Before she was born, her parents had split up and her early life was spent with her mother Tanya. She would later be taken into care due to concerns of neglect. But not long after, she and her brother Dan started living with their father. She was described as burly and feisty with a wicked sense of humor, feeling confident to come out of her shell around those she knew. At school she was more quiet and shy, but her teachers said she was incredibly caring, kind, and had a huge heart. She had a small but very close-knit circle of friends whom she adored, and they adored her in return. Darren would later begin a relationship with a woman called Angie, who herself was a parent to a son called Nathan. When Darren and Angie married in 2013, Nathan had served as best man and Becky as a bridesmaid, along with Nathan's girlfriend, Shauna. Less than 2 years after their wedding day, their world had been turned upside down and Becky was now missing. After calling 999, Becky's father made a desperate plea on Facebook, saying, "Please, if anyone has seen or heard from my daughter, just let me know she is safe." She went missing Thursday 19th at 11:15 a.m. to meet her boyfriend and never arrived, so he came here looking for her. She hasn't been seen since by any of her friends. Police have now started a search. "I'm really scared now. I want her home." Detective Chief Inspector Richard O'Cone said that what was alarming to police was that her social media had not been used. She was regularly in contact with her friendship group, but there had been no communication from her. The story was quickly picked up by the national media. The following day, on Wednesday the 25th of February, her family was asked to leave the home so that a search could be done. But there was still no sign of her. Searches were also being undertaken by 6 teams in various locations, including an area of woodland and 3 houses. The College of Policing and National Crime Agency were drafted in to help, and a helicopter was deployed to help search from the air. The nature reserve at Troopers Hill and a local lake were searched as well, but she was nowhere to be found. The hashtag Find Becky was circulating around social media, and police took to Twitter to get the news out there about her disappearance. The investigating team needed to talk to those closest to Becky to try and ascertain her last known movements and find out any more information that was relevant. They were trying to build a picture of exactly who Becky was, hoping that the answers to their questions could be found. They spoke to Becky's stepmother Angie. As their inquiries continued, they found that the last people who had seen Becky had been her stepbrother Nathan Matthews and his girlfriend, Shauna Hoare. They had initially been hard to pin down for an interview, but the officers were eventually able to get in touch with them and ask them to come to the station. Shauna gave her account of what had happened on the day Becky had last been seen. Nathan gave the same account about hearing the door slam. Several things stood out to investigators. Shauna appeared to be giggly and rather upbeat, and Nathan came across as unconcerned. Another thing that was unusual was just how much their stories aligned. Detective Chief Inspector Richard O'Cone said that most people who witness or experience the same events may give accounts that have incorrect details or don't slot together neatly. He said that in this instance, the fact that their stories were so similar indicated they had spoken to each other beforehand and colluded to make sure their stories matched. Volunteers came out in droves to assist in the searches. Posters were put up and people were determined they were not going to stop looking until she was found. It had now been 9 days since Becky had last been seen. The police brought the major crime unit on board to assist in the investigation and turn their efforts back to Becky's house. They went in with a forensics unit to see if the house held any clues as to where she could be. They made a sinister discovery. Faint spots of blood were found on the doorframe of Becky's bedroom. Fingerprints were found in the blood too. While tests were being carried out, they asked her stepbrother Nathan and his girlfriend Shauna to come back in for a second round of interviews. Shauna's statement that Nathan was finding the situation difficult varied from his. Despite the feelings of officers, they didn't have enough to hold him in custody. This would soon all change. The results had come back from the fingerprint that had been found in the blood on Becky's doorframe. It belonged to her stepbrother Nathan Matthews. It would be several more hours before the results would be in on who the blood belonged to. They decided that if it came back as being Becky's blood, they would make an arrest straight away on suspicion of kidnap, and their worst fears were soon realized. The blood belonged to Becky. Saturday, the 28th of February, 2015. Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hall were taken into custody at a house in Bristol. Nathan was 10 years older than Becky and had known her since she was 2 years old when his mother started dating Darren. Darren's relationship with Nathan had been quite strained. Nathan didn't want anybody interfering with his and his mother's lives. Becky's brother, Dan, got along with Nathan. They would often play video games and spend time in each other's company. But Nathan didn't interact much with Becky. He also didn't live in the family home. He instead lived close by with his grandmother, but would often go over to see his mother and step-family. When Nathan was 19 years old, he had come to the house with 4 young girls in the back of his car, none of them appearing to be older than 12. Darren refused to let him bring them inside and told Nathan to take them all home immediately. In her teens, Becky had struggled with an eating disorder, and whilst her family were deeply concerned, Nathan flippantly dismissed her struggles, saying she was doing it for attention. She had become weaker and would also faint, but Nathan still said this was all for attention. After a year, Becky had made it through and recovered from her illness. In 2008, Nathan Matthews was now 21 years old and brought home his new girlfriend, Shauna Hall. He had told his family she was 19 years old, but she wasn't. She was actually 15. Darren knew he was lying and told him to take Shauna home. Darren had fought hard to get his children out of the care of social services, and he was not going to jeopardize their stability in any way. Nathan and Shauna stayed together, however, and went on to have a daughter. Darren initially didn't like Shauna, saying there was something about her that he couldn't put his finger on. After they were arrested, they were taken to the police station to be questioned again. After allowing Nathan to talk freely, building his confidence in answering their questions, they changed strategy and questioned him in a more direct way. They were also talking to Shauna about her version of events. A forensics team was then sent to Shauna and Nathan's home. The house was in disarray. Every room was filled with items, clutter, and mess. As the search moved throughout the property, one part of the upstairs floor immediately stood out. Going into the bathroom, the left-hand side of the room was much the same as the rest of the property. But the bathtub was spotless. It was shiny and extremely clean, and this meant it didn't fit in with the rest of the home. As the questioning continued, the officers decided not to tell either of them what the latest developments were or what evidence they now had. Over the next 2 days, the forensics team continued to search the house that Nathan and Shauna lived in, and it was an incredibly difficult task given the state of the property. Then, finally, 2 small pieces of paper would give them the lead they had been searching for. 2 receipts for the DIY and hardware store B&Q showed that on Friday, the same day Becky had been reported missing, an electric circular saw, goggles, gloves, and a mask had been purchased. CCTV from the store confirmed that Nathan had been the one to buy the items. Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hall were rearrested, this time on suspicion of the murder of Becky Watts. Following this, the police had to break the devastating news to her family. This was now a murder investigation, and they suspected that Nathan and Shauna were responsible. Becky's father Darren said that it was in that moment his world began to fold in on itself. Before long, flowers were being laid in tribute to Becky as news started to spread. Close to the family home was St. Ambrose Church. A book of remembrance was put out, and the church was open until nighttime for people to light candles for her. Adding to the tragedy, she had been murdered on her brother Dan's 20th birthday. The interviewing officers did not disclose that they had found the receipts. They continued to raise the pressure by saying that the house they had lived in had been forensically searched, leaving the accused guessing as to what exactly had been found. Tuesday, the 3rd of March, 2015. At 10:26 p.m. a statement was given to the police from Nathan via his lawyer. Nathan Matthews refused to listen to it and stuck his fingers in his ears to drown out the sound of his statement being read out. It read as follows. I, Nathan Charles Matthews, accept that I am responsible for the death of Rebecca Watts. On the 19th of February 2015 I attended Crown Hill, St. George, Bristol, with my girlfriend Shauna Hall. In my car I had a large bag, stun device, handcuffs, tape, and a mask. I had developed an idea to scare Rebecca by kidnapping her. I wanted to scare her and teach her a lesson. I believed that she was selfish and her behavior towards my mother was a risk to her health. A few minutes after arriving, Shauna said she wanted a cigarette and went into the garden. I went to the boot of my car, took out a bag that contained the items, then went upstairs to the landing before knocking on Rebecca's door. She replied, "What?" or "Hello," and I said, "Can I see you a minute?" I cannot be sure which order things happened, but I used the items to subdue Rebecca. During the short struggle, my mask slipped and Rebecca was able to see my face. This caused me to panic and I strangled her while she was partially in the bag. Horrifying details did not stop there. After murdering Becky, he had used the saw he had purchased from B and Q to dismember her. She had been dismembered in the bathtub, which had then been cleaned, showing that the officers who had been concerned with how out of place the bath had looked had been absolutely right. The occupants of the house where her body was found were arrested for assisting an offender. They were adamant they had no idea what was inside the bags. They would later plead guilty to the charge. 2 other people would also be acquitted of the same charge. The shed had been searched by Detective Sergeant John Dowding, who had found several suitcases and bags. The body parts had been wrapped in plastic bags and cling film, and cat litter had been used in an attempt to soak up the blood. Salt crystals had also been added to hide the smell. The pathology report showed that Becky had fought for her life with absolutely everything she had. She had sustained more than 40 injuries and had most likely died from suffocation with a hand covering her nose and mouth. She was then stabbed 15 times post-mortem. Becky had to be identified using DNA. The search for Becky Watts had been one of the biggest investigations undertaken by Avon and Somerset police. For the officers who had worked tirelessly to try and find Becky and bring her home, this was a devastating end. Even though Nathan Matthews had provided the police with an account, they wanted to delve deeper and ascertain if this was the whole truth. They also wanted to know if his girlfriend, Shauna Hoare, had played a bigger role than had been suggested. When they interviewed Shauna, she was adamant that the first she had learned of Nathan being responsible had been the day before when he had made his prepared statement. The horrifying account of what exactly had happened would finally come out. Thursday, the 19th of February, 2015. Becky arrives home after spending the night at a friend's. At 10:50 a.m., Shauna and Nathan drive to Becky's home. After stopping at a Tesco's to buy some batteries, they know she will be in the house by herself, as Angie has a hospital appointment. Nathan normally parks on the road, but on this occasion, he reverses the car into the drive with the boot facing the front door. 11:03 a.m., Becky sends her last text message. It is to her boyfriend, saying she is listening to music. She then doesn't respond to his messages. Becky is attacked. She is suffocated and her body is put into the boot of the car. 12:45 p.m. Angie returns home. Nathan and Shauna act like nothing has happened. 5 p.m. Becky's boyfriend arrives at the house concerned that his messages are not getting a response from Becky. Shauna answers the door and pretends to look in Becky's room to see if she is there, and her boyfriend speaks to Darren and Angie. Angie agrees that it is unusual that she isn't responding. 7 p.m. After spending the day with the family and with Becky's body still in the boot of the car outside, Shauna and Nathan drive home. After arriving at the house, they take her body inside and she is dismembered in the bathtub. They then order a pizza and some Chinese food. Nathan Matthews then fakes a phone call from a friend pretending they need his help. He leaves and goes to B&Q. Friday, the 20th of February. At 12:20 p.m., Nathan Matthews heads to a shop and purchases 2 bottles of drain cleaner. He then goes to B&Q and buys the gloves, masks, goggles, and saw. At 3:10, Shauna sends him a message saying, "What time you finish work, lol." 50 minutes later, at 4 p.m., the 999 call is made and Becky is reported missing. Shauna also shares Darren's Facebook post, begging for his daughter to come home. At 6:35 p.m., the police go to Becky's home and speak with Darren, Angie, Nathan, and Shauna. Nathan and Shauna say they heard her leave the house the morning before. By 9 p.m., the pair have returned home and they watch a YouTube video called "Do You Want to Hide a Body?" On the 21st of February, the pair visit an Asda store and purchase bin bags, gloves, rubble sacks, cling film, and bleach. The following day, they go to a 99p store and a Wilko's and purchase a sponge, more rubble sacks, and tape before going to Sainsbury's to buy cling film. On the 23rd of February, the police go to their house in a bid to speak to them, but they are met with silence and nobody opens the door. At 4:38 p.m., a phone belonging to the couple is used to search, find Becky Watts on Google, and just 2 minutes later, Shauna rings her estranged mother, someone she hadn't spoken to for 4 years. to arrange to go to her house that evening. On the 24th of February at 2:19 a.m., CCTV captures a white van driving from Cotton Mill Lane to where Becky's body was found. Her body parts are believed to be in the back of the van. After 96 hours of interviews, Nathan Matthews was charged with the murder of his stepsister. They still didn't have enough to charge Shona with murder, so she was instead charged with perverting the course of justice, and the police continued to build their case against her. Over the following 8 weeks, they continued to look into every aspect of their lives, including phone records, and their computers were also looked at too. It would be in one of Shona's mobile phones that the key to unlock the case would be found. A series of messages had been deleted, but the officers were able to recover them. Nathan Matthews and Shona Hoare had talked about abducting a young woman and hiding her in the attic. Internet searches had also been made for pornographic material involving people around Becky's age. But once again, forensics would show the truth. A bag containing some of the dismembered body parts had Shona's DNA on it, and so did one of the masks. On the 22nd of June, Shona Hall was charged with the murder of Becky Watts. Becky's funeral was held at St. Ambrose Church on the 17th of April. The church service was open to the public, but her burial was private. Mourners lined the streets as her coffin was brought past on a horse-drawn carriage. A white dove was also released as her coffin was brought out. On the 6th of October 2015, the trial of Nathan Matthews and Shona Hoare began at Bristol Crown Court. Becky's family sat stunned as they heard for the first time that 2 years prior to her death, Becky had told one of her friends that Nathan had explained to her in graphic detail how he had planned to murder her. She hadn't told this to her family. He had also been in the Territorial Army after being a cadet, and those who had known him during his time in the TA also gave evidence. The courtroom sat horrified as details emerged of how Nathan and Shona held a shared sexual interest in teenage girls. Prosecutor William Mosley QC said, in addition to their apparent dislike of Rebecca Watts, there is good reason to believe that there was also a sexual motive behind the scheme arising from a shared and natural interest in attractive teenage females. Shona told the court that she was completely innocent and that she was actually scared of her boyfriend. The prosecution fired back, saying that they had acted as a team. Shona's estranged mother also testified at the trial about Shona suddenly wanting to talk to her after Becky had been killed. She said, "I was joking and I said, I know why you're at my house all the time. You're running away from the police because you've kidnapped Becky." It was now time for the jury to deliberate, and before long the verdict was in and it was unanimous. After just 3 hours of deliberations, Shona Hall was found guilty of the kidnap and manslaughter of Becky Watts. Nathan Matthews was found guilty of the kidnap and murder of Becky Watts. Shona Hoare was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Nathan Matthews was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 33 years. When he was led away to begin his sentence, he couldn't look his family in the eye and instead stared at the floor. In June 2016, both Nathan Matthews and Shona Hoare lost their appeals against their convictions. Following her death, a serious case review was commissioned by the Bristol Safeguarding Children Board. It concluded that her murder couldn't have been predicted or prevented. The report said there had not been enough attention paid to Becky's wider family, which included her stepbrother and his girlfriend. It said that Becky's sometimes challenging behavior and her anxiety was a result of the bullying she was enduring from Matthews. Darren would go on to write a book about his daughter, titled Becky, The Heartbreaking Story of Becky Watts. He would later say in an interview they were going to hang him, "I would pull the lever so no one else would have to carry that guilt." The stress of what had happened to his daughter had caused him to lose 4 stone or 56 pounds. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, and he was barely able to keep water down. In spite of all they had been through and the horrifying events that had devastated their family, Darren and Angie's marriage survived and they remained committed to one another. The way the community had come together to help and support the family had been nothing short of incredible, with many lending a hand where they could and doing their best to help. In today's case, we're in the United Kingdom in the Midland city of Leicester, a place with lots of hustle and bustle. It's rich in culture and diversity with lots of art, sports, history, great schools and colleges. It's home to Leicester City Football Club and the Leicester Tigers. Just outside of the busy city center sits Lime Road, which was home to 46-year-old Kieran Daudia and her ex-husband, 51-year-old Ushvin. The couple had had an arranged marriage back in India in 1988 and went on to have 2 sons, Vivek and Shivam. Vivek lived and worked in Sheffield and Shivam lived at home as he finished off school. In 2014, after 26 years of marriage, littered with a string of issues, the couple divorced. They agreed to continue living together while they worked on selling their house, and after this they could move on with their lives separately. Kieran had worked for a next call center for 17 years. Her son said she saw work like a second home and her colleagues were like family. Ashvin often worked long hours operating machines in a factory. Kieran was described as very intelligent, outgoing, loving fashion and makeup, and was an avid Leicester City fan. Her children said she was always so caring and gentle and definitely the backbone of the family. A few years after Kieran and Ashvin had split, Kieran's sister offered to buy their home. After several months of paperwork, the moving dates were set. The plan was Kieran would stay a while longer and Ashvin would move out on January 16, 2017. On the morning of January 16th, Shivam got up and got ready for school as normal. He usually had breakfast with his mother. But on this day, the house was empty and it seemed that Kieran had left for work early. Kieran arrived back at home a few hours later, just before 2:30. When Shivam returned home at 3:30, he was surprised to see his mum wasn't there. As the cold January day quickly rolled into darkness, worry had started to grow. At about 6:30 p.m., Vivek received a call from his grandmother, asking if he had heard from Kieran. He hadn't and immediately shared the concern, coming over to Leicester from Sheffield as soon as he hung up. It was his birthday the next day and the family would all be celebrating. His mother wouldn't not be returning his calls. She would be calling him to plan the special day. Shivam used the Find My app to try and track her phone. It pointed toward Mayfield Road, about a 5-minute walk away from their house, but it didn't really show anything. Could well be just showing the route she took to walk home that afternoon. The family collectively decided there was no reason to hang about and they called 999 and reported her as missing. The police took some details and made a log of it, ready to start looking at it the following day. But before their investigation even really began, at 9 a.m. the next day, they received another call from one of the neighbors, from the nearby Cromer Street. By the bins near a shared alleyway and backyard there was a large suitcase which had appeared there overnight. It was very heavy and the neighbors had decided to look inside. It was the body of a woman. This, coupled with the missing persons reports that had come in the evening before, meant it didn't take long to identify that they had just found Kieran Daudia. They said it was like something out of a horror movie. Kieran had a bin liner over her head and plastic cable ties, securing her hands and ankles, pushing them behind her back. Some torn pieces of latex gloves were also found in the suitcase and were sent off for testing right away. When police called Vivek to tell him, he was given the painful task of going to identify his mother. After this, detectives sat down with Kieran's family. Shivam and Vivek had some stories to share that pointed the investigation in one direction. And within a day, the full and awful truth about what had happened to Kieran would start to unravel. Kieran's family told police that after Ashvin had been told he needed to leave the house in mid-January, he had acted like it wasn't even happening. He refused to pack or make any movements towards finding another place to live, and this was just the tip of the iceberg of the problems between the pair. Vivek and Shivam said that since they were very young, they had been subjected to torrents of abuse from their father. When Vivek was 13, he said that his father had tried to burn him with an iron and would often hit them with things lying around the house. He would often physically hurt Kieran and hurl verbal abuse at her as well. As the years had gone on, the abuse had become worse and Vivek and Shivam were forcing themselves in the middle of the pair in a bid to protect their mother from being hurt. Ashvin soon stopped giving money towards bills, resulting in Kieran working even harder, and he was drinking more than ever, which was adding to the problems. The fact that his ex-wife was allowed to stay in the house and he wasn't was a huge cause of contention, and Ashvin would often lose his temper over it. Kieran had also recently signed up to a dating app telling everybody the divorce was long over and she was excited to move on and meet someone new. When she signed up, Shivam recalled her laughing and saying to him, "What if he ends up killing me?" As Shivam gave the police a rundown of what had happened on January 16th, it became more and more obvious that Ashvin was the only person that showed enough hatred towards Kieran to do something like that to her. Shivam said the second he came home and he realized his mother wasn't there and wasn't answering her phone, he turned to his father and said, "What have you done? I know you've done something." He said that Ashvin could not give him a straight answer. He just stared at him and shrugged. Kieran had been found so close to her home that it made the police's job a lot easier when it came to looking at the cameras around the streets. At 6:19 p.m. on January 16th, 2 cameras on neighboring streets picked up some very sinister footage. The suitcase that Kieran had been forced into was seen being dragged through the streets, and although he had tried to conceal his face, police determined the person hauling it along was Ashvin Daudia. 2 days after she was found, Ashvin was placed under arrest and police began to piece together exactly what had happened. Within minutes of her walking through the door that afternoon, an argument had broken out. Ashvin told police that Kiran had started shouting at him because he hadn't packed anything and he was due to leave that day. The argument soon became physical and Ashvin said he had lost control. He hit Kiran over the head several times before strangling her with her own scarf. After this, he forced her into the suitcase and dragged it outside. He then cleaned up the blood and waited for Shivam to get home at 3:30. As Shivam was out and about frantically trying to find his mother, just after 6 p.m. Ashvin quickly pulled the suitcase back out onto the street. Before hurrying home half an hour later, Ashvin disposed of Kiran's phone, which was later found on the roof of a nearby business, and he also put all cleaning materials and her bloody clothes into another suitcase, which has never been found. After he was charged with murder, the testing on the latex gloves came back and the DNA on them, as they expected, belonged to Ashvin. Almost a year after Kiran Dadia was found, the trial of her ex-husband began at Leicester Crown Court. Vivek and Shivam both testified, painting an unhappy and rage-filled home caused solely by their father. They said. Ashvin's lawyer asked Vivek, "Did you like him?" "Not the abusive parts," he said. His lawyer said, "Can you tell me something nice he did?" Vivek replied, "No." "You can't think of one thing in your whole life?" she asked. "I can't," he said. The prosecution said that when you put all the evidence together, the CCTV, the DNA evidence from inside the latex gloves found in the suitcase, and his prior history of abuse, you can be sure that the defendant's claim of not having anything to do with and not knowing anything about Kiran's death are a pack of lies. What can be the intention when one person strangles another? The answer is obvious. The defense team were pushing for a manslaughter conviction, as Ashvin was claiming it was all self-defense. He said he was being bullied by the rest of the family, including his sons, and was forced to defend himself when Kiran came home and attacked him. The prosecution said to him, "You strangled her until she was dead." Ashvin replied, "My hand. Yes, I pressed her neck. Then I wrapped the scarf around. I didn't know what was happening. I was just holding her." Kiran's family all said this was nonsense, and not in Kiran's nature. She would have never instigated anything and lived in a state of fear most of the time. After just a couple of hours of deliberations, the jury found him guilty of murder, and Ashvin Dadia was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 18 years behind bars. The judge did not hold back in his sentencing remarks. He said Ashvin was far less intelligent than Kiran and was unable to cover his tracks. He said, "In my judgment, you were arrogant, bullying, and bent upon maintaining control. In short, I'm quite satisfied the course of destruction of your family was a course charted by you. Your selfish pride fueled your anger." She was barely over 5 feet tall and of slight build. She was injured and bleeding. You must have overpowered her easily and had her at your mercy. Of mercy you showed none. The judge also praised Vivek and Shivam, calling them fine young men of whom any parent would be proud. Shivam said he can't remember his last moments with his mother. He said he knew he would have spoken to her before he went to bed, but he couldn't remember what they had said to each other, and this causes him pain every day. He also wonders what might have happened to him if he had come home any earlier and seen what his father was doing. Vivek agreed and said, "I now find myself imagining my brother coming home earlier than expected that day. He would have seen our mum being murdered, and I have no doubt that he would have been killed too." Vivek said, "Whilst we can never get our mother back, her strength will live on through us. Every morning I still go on my phone and I text mum good morning as I did every day before. It's the only normal thing that I'm holding on to."